Hello there, I'm Greg Sadler, and I'm really excited about a new educational opportunity coming up in the Study with Sadler Academy that I want to share with you. You might be interested in enrolling and joining us in this online 8-week class, Aristotle on the moral virtues. Now, I say it's new, and this particular section of it is indeed new, but I've taught this class 3 times before. It's a very popular one. It always gets pretty good enrollment, and every class session we have great discussions and we dig deep into portions of Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, a text that I've been reading and rereading and teaching and writing on and doing videos on. Boy, it's about 3 decades at this point in time, maybe a little bit more. So you can tell it's something that I'm really into. And if you want to understand virtue ethics in general, and specifically Aristotelian virtue ethics, this is a wonderful way to do it. I'll tell you exactly what we're going to study in just a bit, but I want to say a bit about the class first. So you might have a few questions. Well, I don't have a lot of background in Aristotle. Is this going to be too difficult for me? No, because it's a class that is set up for everybody from raw beginners all the way up to some, graduate students and fellow professors that I have in my classes. Everybody will get something out of it. I've been teaching, this is I think year 25 for me, so I'm pretty experienced in thinking about what learners need and how to meet them where they are, how to come up with really good examples, how to provoke discussion, and that's exactly what we do in these online courses. Now, you might say, well, so an online course, does that mean I work at my own pace? Well, kind of, but we're actually going to go through it as a cohort together. We'll meet once a week on Saturdays, and I'll tell you when this class starts in just a bit and sort of the sequence of it. So every Saturday for 8 weeks, we will be meeting at 9 a.m. Central Time for about an hour and a half, sometimes 2 hours. We record these sessions so you can go back over them later, or if you happen to miss a session, you can just watch the video recording of it. We have discussion forums to continue the conversation about the really cool topics that we're studying. And what I bring to each session of the class is a lot of preparation for helping you work your way through the text. Hopefully you've read it before we have the class session, and we're reading just sort of, bite-sized chunks. We're not reading massive tomes every single week. And then you go back to the text afterwards, and you're going to get so much more out of it. So I mentioned that I would tell you when it's starting. So it is going to begin on Saturday, September 27th. So there's, at the time that I'm publishing this, a few weeks to get yourself enrolled if you want to. And we will take off on the very first class session going into Book 2 of the Nicomachean Ethics, which is fairly general, talking about virtues. And then we're going to do deep dives into each of the virtues that Aristotle discusses. So let's talk about what we're going to do each week. I mentioned the first week we're going to talk about the general features of virtues and vices in Nicomachean Ethics, Book 2. So we'll be talking about the nature of ethics itself and virtues and vices. What are they? Aristotle says that they're habits. We'll introduce one of his most famous conceptions, the virtuous mean, and we'll talk about what kind of middle position it is. We'll talk about how human beings actually develop the virtues and what the connection is to pleasure and pain. And then we'll start doing an overview of where we're going for the next 7 weeks, looking at each of the virtues, not in complete depth, but at least, where they fit into his schema overall. Then in week 2, we're going to start examining 2 of the most important of the virtues for Aristotle in Nicomachean Ethics, book 3, and those are courage or bravery and temperance or moderation. So we'll be looking at, well, what is courage actually? How do we understand it? Likewise, what is temperance, which Aristotle focuses primarily in terms of bodily pleasures and pains and our desires for that and how much we indulge it. But we'll also think about what emotions are involved with these particular virtues and their associated vices. And we'll talk about his discussion of 5 facsimiles of courage, things that aren't really courage, but we might get mistaken and think that they are. And then we'll also talk about, what is it that we find pleasant as human beings. So that's week 2. Week 3, we are going to spend looking at something that I do a lot of work on, one particular virtue and some associated vices, all of which have to do with another emotion, anger. The virtue of, it's translated in different ways, mildness, good temper, gentleness, which doesn't mean never getting angry for Aristotle. How do we find that middle position? So we're going to look at what anger is and how it works. Turns out for Aristotle, it's one of the most complex of the emotions. And we'll look at what the virtuous disposition would be and then what the opposed vices would be. And this is one where there's quite a few of them on either side of the mean. In session 4, we'll be shifting, and by the way, we already moved into book 4 of the Nicomachean Ethics with the previous week. We're going to be doing some other stuff in book 4 that's really distinctive to Aristotle and his approach. We're going to be looking at virtues and vices that have to do with how we give and take or spend our resources, particularly wealth, but this could also apply to time and attention. So we're going to talk about generosity and magnificence. Generosity is on an everyday level. Magnificence is what people with a lot of means can do. So we'll be talking about what Aristotle calls the external goods of wealth and other resources, what the virtue of liberality or generosity looks like, what the vices associated with it are, and then what kind of magnificent outlays, which don't necessarily have to be gigantic, they can include home furnishings and things like that for Aristotle, or how we put on parties on special occasions, how we show that virtue of magnificence and what the opposed vices are. So that takes us to the halfway point. In week 5, we'll be continuing on with our examination of book 4, and we are going to focus on 2 other closely connected, in a similar way, virtues, that of right ambition, which is available to everybody, and that of magnanimity or great-souledness, which is a sort of elevation of the mind or the soul. We'll be looking at the key good that these deal with, what we call honor, but we could also translate as respect or social status, and why that's a particular good for Aristotle. And we'll also be looking at a kind of interesting outlier in the discussion of magnanimity, the sort of semi-virtue of what he calls modesty. So then we will move on to the remaining 3 virtues in week 6 that we're pulling from Nicomachean Ethics book 4. What are those? Well, these are the virtues that have to do with social life, how we comport ourselves. And again, this is something really distinctive, I think, to Aristotle that he's bringing to the table. We will be looking at the virtue of friendliness, which is not exactly the same thing as friendship, but is a virtue nonetheless. Good humor or wit. Aristotle thinks that having a good sense of humor, that's part of what it goes into being virtuous. And then truthfulness, not truthfulness per se, but truthfulness about us, how we present ourselves, how we conceive of ourselves. So we'll be looking at what each of those is and the associated vices, where we go wrong as people. As we move into the final quarter of the class with week 7, we will spend an entire session looking at Nicomachean Ethics Book 5, which is all about the virtue of justice. As it turns out, justice is a term that means a number of different things for Aristotle, so we got to clarify the different senses. It's also something that kind of ties all the virtues together according to at least one conception of justice. So we're going to be looking at the different forms of justice, how justice can be a virtuous disposition, what complete virtue, as he calls it, is, legal justice and norm following, and then some modes of particular justice. And we will wrap the class up in week 8 by looking at the virtue of prudence or practical wisdom. And you might say, whoa, wait a second. I've read my Aristotle. I know that that's an intellectual virtue, not a moral virtue. What are you trying to do here, Sadler? Well, it is, yes, it is an intellectual virtue, but it's one that bears upon the moral virtues, and it's interconnected with them in ways that the other intellectual virtues aren't. So we're going to get that out of Nicomachean Ethics, Book 6, and we will be looking at how it functions, how it uses general principles and applies them to particular matters, and how it's connected with deliberation, understanding, considerateness, and how it, we could say, influences or guides the other virtues, making them what they actually are. And this is going to bring us to an interesting question. Is there something like a unity to these different virtues? That's a question that does come up in Book 6, so we're going to consider that. So that's the plan for the 8-week term, which will be beginning again on September 27th. We'll be meeting every week. I'm going to provide the students that are enrolled in it. I hope that means I'm talking to you and you'll be one of those students, with all sorts of great handouts that I have developed over my many years of teaching this. We'll talk about how to apply these concepts so that you can develop these virtues and wean yourselves away from any vices that you might have. And as I pointed out before, you will retain access to the class recordings. I should mention, how long do you get access? Well, so long as the Study with Sadler Academy is around. Once you're enrolled, you get to have lifetime access to all of this. So I hope that you'll consider joining me for this 4th year of this very high demand class. Every time that I offer it, people get very excited about this. I guess there's a lot of Aristotle aficionados or interested, or whatever you want to call them, people who want to do Aristotle and understand his views on the moral virtues. There's a lot of them out there. If that's you, well, consider enrolling in the class. The link is below in the video. You can easily sign up, and we're going to have a great time. So I hope that you'll join me for this. And if you can't this time, well, we'll do this again in the future. But this is what we're offering this time around.